of the things that we got that's new this year that we really haven't talked about too much in our other videos are the kayak racks. In the past, Pat had a pickup truck and we used to just throw the kayaks in the bed of the pickup truck, but when he got rid of that and we got the Jeep so that we could pull the Scamp, we had no way to move our kayaks, so we actually haven't used them in like almost 2 years. So we finally got kayak racks at the beginning of the summer, and it's been really great because we can just throw them up there. They're the folding kind so that we can put them down when we're not using them, fold them up and put the kayaks on there. And tonight we're just going to go down to the lake over here right where we live. This is actually the second kayak rack that we ordered. The first one was missing some bolts and just was not sturdy, so we ended up returning that because we just didn't trust it. But as much as we love the new kayak rack and our kayaks, this video is really not about the kayaks. This was when we figured out that a whole colony of cave crickets had moved into our kayak. This video was really about seeing how different our life is now that we have lived in a tiny house for a little over 4 years. Things have really changed. This is the first time I've been in Patrick's car in 2 weeks since the spider was found on July 4th, and we still didn't find the spider. He swears that it's dead. I don't know if I think it's dead, so I'm not putting my feet on the ground because it lived underneath my seat. So I thought about walking to the lake, but figured I have to get back in the car eventually, so. For us, the decision to move into a tiny house was really more about what we do outside of the house than what we do with the house itself. It's about making time for doing more of the things that we enjoy, like taking out our kayaks. Did you get all the spiders and crickets out? You think so? That does not instill confidence in me. It is a good launch spot. There are 2 lakes here. They're kind of divided by like a man-made walkway. And we usually go in the big lake, but we've never kayaked in the smaller lake, so today we're going to try it out. It's funny, over by our house where it's really shady, the mosquitoes are terrible right now. Like, just trying to get the kayaks on the car, we were being eaten alive, and now actually being out on the lake, there's no mosquitoes out here, so a little different than what you might expect. Along the edges of our ponds and streams in South Jersey, we have a lot of these carnivorous plants, the Sundew, and actually they're just starting to bloom right now, which is very neat. And there's also a lot of sphagnum moss around the edges. There's another blue dragonfly, so I guess they do actually get stuck to the Sundew. Just a few years ago, I found myself in a situation where I was working around 50 hours a week. I had a mortgage and taxes and a mountain of student loan debt that I was trying to get out from under. And that meant I had to work a lot. And most of the time when I wasn't at work, I was pretty much exhausted, and I would just sit on the couch and watch TV and try to recover before I had to go back to work again. At that point in my life, just throwing the kayaks in and paddling around probably wouldn't have happened. These are the Waterfront Sites, and there's actually two other tiny houses, the two other tiny houses at the resort. The brown one back there, and then the yellow one up here. So the yellow one was made by the same builder who made our house. About a year after ours was delivered, that yellow house was delivered. And it's really neat. They have their own dock and everything, but we chose not to do a waterfront site because obviously you don't have as much privacy, and they're also more expensive. But it would be really neat to wake up some days and just walk out onto your own dock. Oh. You gonna go in the big lake? Yeah. This is the most ungraceful kayak mount I've ever seen. I guess it works. That's why I'm the person behind the camera. When I was working those really long days and didn't have the time or the energy for anything outside of work, you may have guessed that I was pretty unhappy with that. And I decided that I had to make a pretty radical life change. The cornerstone of that whole restructuring of my life was moving into the tiny house, of simplifying, downsizing, and moving into the tiny house to significantly decrease my cost of living and to open up my time. One of the things that I always find funny when we're talking to people about living in the tiny house, they kind of say something to the effect of, well, I know it's not a trailer, it's a tiny house, but isn't it kind of similar? And I always have to kind of laugh because I'll say flat out, we live in a trailer. I have no problem with that. I don't find that fact embarrassing or anything, because it's a choice. But the tiny house, like calling it a tiny house, is basically just a way of saying it's a movable structure, at least a tiny house on wheels, but it's made out of house materials instead of plastic and things like that that you would find in an RV. The tiny house is just made out of wood and drywall and stuff like that, but it's still a trailer. It's just a new, modern, updated way of living in a trailer where the layouts are more conducive to feeling like a home instead of feeling like a regular trailer. The other thing that I find to be really funny is kind of along similar lines. People will say like, oh, you live in a tiny house, where do you put it? You don't live in a trailer park, do you? And I'm like, yeah, we live essentially in a trailer park. It's technically called a resort to sound nicer, but there are regular trailers here. Sometimes I'll say it's a manufactured home community, but really it's just different ways of saying that it is a trailer park, but not kind of feeding into that whole stigma of living in a trailer park. But when you cut past all of that, that's just what it is, and I'm totally fine with that. It doesn't bother me to say I live in a trailer park or I live in a trailer, because to me it's being able to do this. When I had a house in the suburbs, I couldn't just take my kayak and walk down to the lake and throw it in on a Saturday night for just a couple hours, and I didn't sit outside and have campfires almost every day of the week in the summer. So it's a very different way of living, and to me, living in a trailer and living in a trailer park, if that's what this is, then I'm all for it. Being able to end my day like this is exactly why I wanted to move into a tiny house. Downsizing the square footage that I have to live in and some of my physical possessions was well worth the freedom and the extra time that I gained. Now, sometimes the media makes it look like when you move into a tiny house you can just quit your job, and that's definitely not true. For me, the difference was going from working 50 hours a week to working about 35 hours a week and having the time and the energy to put toward projects and activities that I really love doing, like going kayaking and making videos like this. We brought the kayaks back over to the Jeep and got them loaded up and headed back to the tiny house. Now, maybe in another video we'll talk to you guys a little more about our kayaks, but we really love our kayaks. I've had a few different kayaks in my life, and these are definitely my favorite. A little heavy, but they glide beautifully in the water and they're easy to steer. We headed back to the tiny house and started a fire in our chimenea. This is one of our favorite ways to end the day. Sitting outside, enjoying the weather, and hanging out with Redford. Oh, hello Redford. Hi. A big part of living in a tiny house is maximizing your outdoor space. This is what we call our outdoor living room. Taking the iPad outside, watching some YouTube videos by the fire. And you heard me mention earlier how bad the mosquitoes are. This is our thermocell. We use this all the time in the summer when we sit outside. We also have a mosquito net that goes over our swing, and that really helps. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you take anything away from it, it's that if you're not happy with the way your life is structured right now, you can make really big changes.
You worried about you and me, the injustice, the next president to be, the news and what you hear, your career. It's time for you to face those fears, and it's all fair to be aware, and I'll be there, so don't be scared. Just take a deep breath of air, and 1, 2, 3 to 10, you begin to focus again, and though time flies, we'll have enough to realize